Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's Entrepreneur. Joining me today is Todd Hirsch, who is an economist, author, and speaker based in Calgary. Thanks, Todd, for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Mario.
Okay, let's talk about the state of the economy in Canada these days, and I want to talk about different segments of it, and of course, let's start with the GDP. Where are we at, and from what you've seen from the latest figures in terms of the economic growth in this country or non-growth?
Yeah, well, 2025 was an interesting year. About a year ago, when the tariff tantrum began with Donald Trump announcing all these tariffs on Canada, I was actually much more pessimistic about the Canadian economy. I was more or less predicting a recession in 2025, but it didn't happen. In fact, the Canadian economy was a little more resilient than we thought. Now, there's different reasons for that, but even though we avoided a recession, growth was pretty flat overall. We don't have all the numbers in for 2025, but overall, a pretty flat year. But it's a small victory because we actually did avoid an outright recession.
Yeah, and what about you know, we're we're in what 13 days into the new year. What are you seeing economists forecasting for this year for the economy?
Well, I've sort of gone on record that, forecasts are,
Yeah.
we live in an unforecastable world.
Yeah.
The most recent forecast from the Bank of Canada and some of the other big banks, it's still pretty flat, maybe 1.2, 1.5% real GDP growth. But that could change on a dime. We just don't know how 2026 is going to shape up here. The big factor, of course, is still the renegotiation of CUSMA. That's the North American Free Trade Agreement. And I really don't think that we can expect a fantastic result from that. Donald
Mhm.
Trump is not giving up on tariffs. He's in an owly mood. He's taken over Greenland. Like, we
Yeah.
live in a world that is, in some ways completely unthinkable a few years ago. But now we are living this. So I think that we can expect a tough renegotiation of CUSMA. And I think overall that might weigh on Canada's economy.
Hmm. Looking into the labor market, let's talk a little bit about that. What strikes you about the labor market in Canada these days, and some of the most recent data that Stats Canada put out?
Yeah, well, the labor market, like the GDP, is in pretty soft shape. It's not a disaster. I think the last numbers for national unemployment rate about 6.8%. That's far higher than it should be. We'd like it around 4.5, 5% ideally. So it is higher than where we would like it, but it's also not 10% unemployment. And again, looking back over the last year, 10% unemployment didn't seem an unreasonable expectation. So the labor market, in some ways, is holding out better than I would have thought. But it's still pretty soft, especially in some of those parts of the country that are really being hit hard by the steel, the automotive, the aluminum tariffs that are already in place. So it's uneven across the country, but kind of a soft labor market right now.
And I think looking back at those stats, the one demographic group that seems to be being hit hard is that younger group.
Yeah.
Is that concerning for you? See what's happening there?
It is concerning for me. It's concerning for a lot of economists because that 15 to 24-year-old age cohort, job experience is really critical if they are going to launch sort of into more successful careers, longer term careers as they get older or after university or college. And if they're having a hard time finding even entry level work experience, that does pose a problem. Now, some people might say, well, they just don't want to take the jobs, the unglamorous jobs in, fast food or, some of these things. To which degree that's true, I'm not really sure. I think it's tough overall. I don't want to paint all young people as lazy as entitled. I know that's an easy excuse. But overall, I think the job market for those young people is pretty tough, and that is a concern.
Okay, let's talk about inflation and um, where are we at these days when it comes to inflation?
Inflation's been a little bit uneven, mostly okay, though. I think it's close to where the Bank of Canada would like to see it. But that is still leaving, even though overall inflation has come back down close to that 2% range, prices remain elevated. That is the big challenge. So even though the Bank of Canada is happy these days with overall year over year increase in prices, which is inflation, the problem for Canadian households is that the price level remains elevated, and those prices are not likely to come down. So it's still a tough uh, environment for a lot of households that are still feeling a lot of price pressure on things like groceries
Mm.
and transportation, and in some markets, rent.
If there was one thing that you were going to keep a close eye on this year when it comes to the economy, what is it for you?
Well, I think, I mean, the obvious one, and we talked a little bit about this, is the tariff renegotiation. I think that
Yeah,
is going to be the most critical one. But I think the most interesting one, in a way, is going, and this will happen, I think, a little bit sooner, is the geopolitics of the world right now, which is, it's an issue adjacent to economics. But what Donald Trump and the US administration does in the next few weeks around Greenland, this is a complete game changer for the
mm,
global world order. And therefore, there are going to be economic ramifications. And a country like Canada has a lot of skin in the game. So, even though I think the most important one for 2026 is going to be the CUSMA renegotiation, I think the most interesting one, at least in the short term, is the geopolitics.
yeah. And last question, Todd. When you look at consumers these days, what do you expect from consumers this year? Who are obviously challenged and under a lot of pressure with costs, et cetera.
Well, the Canadian consumer sort of continues to surprise, even though like last year it was a tough year for the job market and GDP. Overall consumer spending, consumer enthusiasm kind of outperformed a little bit.
Yeah.
In 2026, we might see a continuation of that. But again, depending on how global events go, depending on how Canada's economy goes, we could see some pessimism set in on the part of consumers. We could see some pullback. I don't know if that is my forecast. It's really tough to forecast consumer sentiment because so much of it is psychology and not really economics. But for the time being, Canadian consumers seem to be holding in there. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Thank you, Todd, for joining us again.
Thanks, Mario. Have a great day.
You too. That was Todd Hirsch, an author, speaker, and economist based in Calgary. I'm Mario Tonaguzzi, managing editor of Canada's Entrepreneur. Thanks for joining us today.